When FBI Director Kash Patel walked into that McDonald's, 22-year-old Keisha Williams made a split-second decision that would cost her everything. She refused his payment out of respect, covering his meal with her own money. By the next morning, she was fired. But what Director Patel did when he learned about her termination will shock you. The security footage told the whole story. Keisha waving off payment with a respectful smile, Patel's surprised gratitude, and corporate executives reviewing the tape with cold calculation. Within 24 hours, a simple act of respect had become a policy violation worthy of immediate termination. But this story was just beginning, and the young woman who lost her job had no idea she'd caught the attention of the most principled leader in Washington. Just 3 days earlier, the situation was completely different. Keisha had been one of McDonald's most reliable employees, working the morning shift on Benning Road in Southeast Washington, D.C. She'd been there 2 years, never missed a day, always volunteered for extra hours when someone called out. Her grandmother had raised her to show respect to people in positions of authority and service. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The breakfast rush was winding down when the black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Keisha noticed it immediately. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that meant someone important was about to walk through those doors. She straightened her uniform and checked her name tag, wondering if today might be different somehow. Director Kash Patel entered quietly, no fanfare, no security detail visible. He moved with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations, yet his demeanor remained approachable. Keisha had seen him on the news countless times, always impressed by his unwavering commitment to truth and justice. Now here he was, standing at her register like any other customer. "Good morning, sir," Keisha said, her voice steady despite her surprise. "What can I get for you today?" Patel smiled warmly. "Just a black coffee and a sausage McMuffin, please." As she rang up the order, she noticed the weight he seemed to carry, the burden of someone who'd spent years fighting institutional corruption and defending constitutional principles. When the total appeared on the screen, something stirred in Keisha's heart. This man had dedicated his career to exposing wrongdoing in the highest levels of government, often at great personal cost. He'd stood firm against pressure from powerful interests, always choosing truth over convenience. The least she could do was show her appreciation for his service to the country. "Actually, sir," Keisha said, reaching into her apron for her own money, "this one's on me. Thank you for everything you do for our country." Director Patel's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's very kind of you, but I can pay." Keisha shook her head gently. "I insist, sir. It's just my way of saying thank you." She handed over $6 from her tip money. Patel studied her face for a moment, seeing genuine respect and gratitude in her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Keisha Williams, sir." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Keisha, that's one of the most thoughtful gestures I've received in a long time. Your parents raised you right." The warmth in his voice made her grandmother's lessons about character and respect feel even more valuable. As Director Patel waited for his order, he engaged Keisha in brief conversation. He asked about her studies. She was taking night classes at community college, and her goals. "I want to work in criminal justice someday," she shared. "Maybe help people like you do." Patel's expression grew serious. "That's noble work, Keisha. We need more people with your character in public service." The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it left a profound impression on both of them. Patel thanked her again before leaving, and Keisha felt a quiet pride in having honored someone who'd sacrificed so much for justice. She had no idea that the security cameras had captured every moment, or that her simple act of respect would soon be twisted into something unrecognizable. Later that morning, Keisha finished her shift, feeling good about the day. She'd shown proper respect to a man who'd earned it through years of principled service. Her grandmother had always taught her that character was revealed in small moments, in how we treat others when no one important is watching. She thought she'd done the right thing. The call came at 6 a.m. the next morning. "Keisha, this is Manager Rodriguez. We need to see you in the office immediately." His tone was cold, official. Keisha's stomach dropped. She'd never been called in like this before. As she dressed quickly, her mind raced through possible explanations, but nothing made sense. She'd followed every protocol, been nothing but professional. The drive to the restaurant felt longer than usual. Keisha tried to calm her nerves by reminding herself of her spotless record. 2 years without a single complaint, multiple commendations for customer service, perfect attendance. Whatever this was about, surely they'd understand once she explained. The corporate world had procedures, but it also had room for human decency, didn't it? Manager Rodriguez was waiting with the district supervisor, a stern-faced woman named Jennifer Walsh. The office felt smaller with 3 people crowded inside. "Sit down, Keisha," Rodriguez said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. The security monitor showed a frozen frame of yesterday's interaction with Director Patel. Keisha's heart began to race as she realized where this was heading. "Can you explain this?" Walsh asked, pointing at the screen. The image showed Keisha clearly refusing Patel's payment and reaching for her own money. "I paid for a customer's meal out of respect," Keisha said honestly. "He's the FBI director, and I wanted to thank him for his service." Walsh's expression didn't soften. "You understand that constitutes theft under company policy?" Keisha felt the room spinning slightly. "Theft? But I paid for it myself. I used my own money." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "The policy is clear, Keisha. No free food to anyone, regardless of who pays. It sets a precedent we can't allow." Walsh nodded in agreement. "If we make exceptions for government officials, where does it end? Every employee will claim they're honoring someone." "But this is FBI Director Patel," Keisha protested, her voice rising slightly. "He's dedicated his life to fighting corruption and protecting our democracy. Surely showing respect to someone like that isn't the same as giving free food to just anyone." Walsh's expression remained unmoved. "Policy doesn't distinguish between customers. A violation is a violation, regardless of the customer's position or your intentions." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Keisha thought about her grandmother, who'd worked 3 jobs to raise her after her parents died. She thought about the community college classes she was taking, paid for with money saved from this job. "Please," she said quietly, "I've never broken any rules before. This was just a moment of respect." Walsh consulted a tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be corporate guidelines. The policy manual is explicit. Any unauthorized discounting or complimentary items, regardless of funding source, constitutes a Category 3 violation. The standard penalty is immediate termination. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Keisha realized that her fate had been decided before she even walked into the room. "You can't be serious," Keisha said, disbelief creeping into her voice. "I honored a man who spent his career fighting for justice, and you're firing me for it." Walsh closed the tablet with a decisive snap. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately. Please clear out your locker and surrender your uniform." The corporate machine had spoken, and apparently respect was not in its vocabulary. As Keisha cleaned out her locker, her coworkers watched in stunned silence. Maria, who'd worked there 5 years, whispered, "This is crazy. You did something beautiful." But corporate policy didn't recognize beauty, only compliance. Keisha folded her extra uniform, gathered her few personal items, and walked toward the exit, wondering how showing respect had become a fireable offense. That evening, local news picked up the story. A security guard who'd witnessed the incident had quietly shared details with a reporter friend. "McDonald's employee fired for honoring FBI director" became the headline that began spreading across social media. The story captured something larger than a simple policy violation. It represented the collision between human decency and corporate inflexibility. Director Patel learned about Keisha's termination through his security detail, who monitored news stories involving his public appearances. As he read the article in his office, his jaw tightened with controlled anger. Here was a young woman who'd shown genuine respect for public service, and she'd been punished for it. This was exactly the kind of injustice he'd spent his career fighting. Patel immediately called his chief of staff. "I need everything we can find about Keisha Williams: employment history, educational background, family situation. And I want a meeting with McDonald's corporate leadership within 48 hours. His staff had seen this look before, the quiet determination that preceded his most decisive actions. Someone had been wronged, and he intended to make it right. Meanwhile, social media erupted with outrage. Justice for Keisha began trending as people shared stories of their own encounters with inflexible corporate policies. Veterans, police officers, and ordinary citizens expressed disgust that a young woman had been fired for showing respect to a public servant. The backlash against McDonald's was swift and unforgiving, but corporate headquarters remained silent. Keisha spent the day fielding calls from reporters and trying to process what had happened. Her grandmother, now 78 and battling diabetes, was devastated. "You did right, baby," she kept saying through tears. "You showed that man the respect he deserved." But respect didn't pay bills or cover tuition, and Keisha faced the harsh reality of being unemployed with little savings. That Wednesday morning, Director Patel made an unprecedented decision. Instead of sending subordinates, he would personally visit McDonald's corporate headquarters in Chicago. His staff tried to dissuade him, arguing that his time was better spent on national security matters. But Patel understood that justice issues, even seemingly small ones, were exactly the battles that defined a society's character. The flight to Chicago gave Patel time to review Keisha's background. Straight-A student in high school, working full-time while pursuing criminal justice studies, raised by her grandmother after losing both parents in a car accident when she was 16. Her McDonald's employment record was exemplary. Not a single customer complaint, multiple commendations, perfect attendance. She represented everything admirable about young Americans striving for better lives. McDonald's corporate headquarters buzzed with nervous energy as word spread that FBI Director Patel was en route. Emergency meetings were convened, legal teams assembled, public relations specialists crafted potential responses, but none of them had dealt with someone like Patel, a man who'd built his reputation on refusing to be intimidated by powerful institutions, regardless of their size or influence. Patel arrived without fanfare, accompanied only by one aide. The corporate executives who met him in the marble-lined lobby were clearly uncomfortable. Chief Operating Officer Richard Steinberg led the group, flanked by legal counsel and public relations managers. "Director Patel, this is unexpected," Steinberg said, attempting a confident smile. "We're honored by your visit, though we're not sure what brings you here." "Keisha Williams," Patel replied simply, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made career politicians nervous in congressional hearings. "A young woman lost her job for showing respect to a public servant. I'd like to understand how that aligns with your company's values." The executives exchanged glances. Clearly, they'd hoped this situation would fade quietly from public attention. Steinberg led them to a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. The walls were decorated with McDonald's awards and corporate mission statements about serving communities and empowering people. Patel noted the irony as he took a seat at the polished table. "Gentlemen," he began, "let's discuss what happened to Miss Williams and how we might resolve this situation appropriately." "Director Patel," interrupted legal counsel Margaret Forsyth, "with all due respect, this is an internal personnel matter. Company policy was clearly violated, regardless of the employee's intentions." Patel's gaze remained steady. "Miss Forsyth, I've spent years investigating institutions that hide behind policies to avoid accountability. Miss Williams paid for my meal with her own money out of respect. Your policy punished decency." The room fell silent. Steinberg cleared his throat. "Our policies exist to prevent theft and ensure consistency across 40,000 locations worldwide. We can't make exceptions based on who the customer might be." Patel leaned forward slightly. "So your position is that showing respect to public servants should be discouraged? That young people shouldn't honor those who serve their country?" Public Relations Director James Mitchell, who'd been silent until now, spoke up nervously. "Director, we appreciate your concern, but policies must be applied uniformly. If we allowed this exception, every employee could claim they were honoring someone." Patel's expression grew stern. "Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that FBI directors visit McDonald's locations so frequently that this would become a widespread problem?" The logic was devastating, and everyone in the room knew it. Forsyth attempted to regain control. "The bottom line is that unauthorized discounts, regardless of funding source, violate clear company guidelines. The termination was procedurally correct. Patel nodded slowly. Procedurally correct, perhaps, but morally bankrupt. You've punished a young woman for displaying the exact character traits we should celebrate in our citizens. Steinberg tried a different approach. Director Patel, we understand your position, but reversing this decision would set a dangerous precedent. Our franchise owners rely on consistent policy enforcement. Patel's response was measured but firm. Mr. Steinberg, I've seen what happens when institutions prioritize procedures over principles. It never ends well. Miss Williams deserves better from a company that claims to serve communities. The tension in the room was palpable. These executives were accustomed to controlling narratives, managing crises through carefully crafted statements and strategic delays. But Patel represented something they couldn't manipulate: moral authority backed by unwavering principle. His presence transformed their corporate boardroom into a tribunal where their values were being weighed and found wanting. Mitchell attempted to steer the conversation toward compromise. Perhaps we could offer Miss Williams a position at another location with additional training on policy compliance. Patel's expression didn't change. You're missing the point entirely. She shouldn't need training on policy compliance. She should be commended for her character. The problem isn't with Miss Williams, it's with policies that punish decency. Forsyth consulted her legal pad, clearly frustrated by Patel's refusal to accept their standard corporate responses. Director, you're asking us to ignore established procedures that protect the company from liability and ensure operational consistency. That's not something we can do lightly. Patel stood slowly, his patience clearly wearing thin. Miss Forsyth, I'm asking you to do what's right. The simplicity of his statement hung in the air like a challenge. These executives lived in a world of complex legal frameworks, risk assessments, and corporate liability. The concept of simply doing what's right seemed to confuse them more than any regulatory requirement. Patel realized he was dealing with people who'd forgotten that policies should serve human decency, not replace it. Steinberg made one final attempt to maintain corporate authority. Director Patel, we appreciate your advocacy for Miss Williams, but our decision stands. The termination was justified under company policy, and we won't be reversing it. The words were barely out of his mouth when Patel's expression shifted to something the executives had only seen in congressional hearings: cold, determined, and absolutely implacable. Very well, Patel said quietly, gathering his coat. You've made your position clear. Now I'll make mine equally clear. Miss Williams will have her job back, or McDonald's will discover what happens when principled leadership decides to take action. The threat wasn't loud or dramatic. It was delivered with the calm certainty of someone who'd never lost a battle when justice was on his side. As Patel walked toward the door, Forsyth called out nervously, "Director, what exactly does that mean?" He turned back, his expression unreadable. "It means you have 24 hours to do the right thing voluntarily. After that, you'll discover how creative federal agencies can be when they decide to ensure corporate compliance with various regulations. Have a good afternoon, gentlemen." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded ominous to everyone remaining in the room. Steinberg stared at the empty chair where Patel had sat, slowly realizing that they'd just been outmaneuvered by someone who understood power in ways their corporate training had never prepared them for. The FBI director hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made explicit threats, but his message was crystal clear. Within minutes of Patel's departure, emergency conference calls were being placed to McDonald's CEO in London, board members across the country, and crisis management specialists. The executives who'd felt so confident in their corporate policies suddenly found themselves scrambling to understand what federal regulatory review might entail. None of them wanted to find out firsthand what Patel meant by creative federal agencies. Meanwhile, Patel was already on his way back to Washington, his aide frantically making calls to various federal departments. Labor compliance, health inspections, tax audits, immigration verification. Any major corporation had dozens of potential pressure points where increased federal scrutiny could prove extremely uncomfortable. Patel wasn't planning to abuse his authority, but he was certainly prepared to ensure that McDonald's received the most thorough regulatory attention possible. Back in Washington, Keisha was sitting in her grandmother's small apartment, scrolling through the flood of social media support while trying to figure out how to pay next month's rent. She had no idea that the most powerful law enforcement official in the country was personally advocating for her, or that corporate executives in Chicago were beginning to panic about their decision. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. "Miss Williams, this is Richard Steinberg from McDonald's corporate headquarters. I understand there may have been some miscommunication regarding your employment status. We'd like to invite you to a meeting to discuss your situation." Keisha's hand trembled as she held the phone. After 2 days of unemployment and uncertainty, corporate McDonald's was suddenly interested in talking. Keisha arrived at the regional office in downtown D.C. wearing her best interview outfit, a simple blue dress her grandmother had bought for church. She was nervous but determined to maintain her dignity, regardless of what they offered. In her purse was a letter of support from Director Patel's office, which had arrived that morning by special delivery, expressing his continued confidence in her character. The meeting room contained the same nervous energy she'd encountered at her termination. Regional Director Patricia Hayes led the discussion, flanked by human resources representatives and a legal observer connected by video from Chicago. "Miss Williams," Hayes began carefully, "we've reviewed your employment record and the circumstances of your recent termination. We may have acted hastily." Keisha remained silent, waiting for them to reveal their actual position. Years of watching her grandmother navigate bureaucratic systems had taught her that the first offer was rarely the final one. Hayes continued, "We'd like to offer you reinstatement to your previous position with full back pay for the days you've missed and a formal apology for any misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Keisha repeated quietly. "I was fired for showing respect to the FBI director. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a policy choice." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps policy application is a better term. We've decided that in unique circumstances involving public officials, some flexibility in policy interpretation may be appropriate." The corporate doublespeak was nauseating, but Keisha recognized the victory it represented. The legal observer from Chicago spoke up through the video connection. "Miss Williams, we're also prepared to offer additional compensation for any inconvenience this situation may have caused." Keisha looked directly at the camera. "What I want is an acknowledgement that I did nothing wrong, that showing respect to public servants isn't a fireable offense. Can you provide that?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Hayes spoke. "We can acknowledge that your actions were well-intentioned and that perhaps our initial response didn't fully consider the unique circumstances." It wasn't the full vindication Keisha deserved, but it was more than she'd expected when she'd cleaned out her locker 3 days earlier. Sometimes progress came in smaller increments than justice demanded. Keisha accepted their offer, but with conditions. She wanted a written guarantee that the policy regarding public servants would be clarified to prevent future incidents. She wanted assurance that her employment record would reflect no disciplinary action. And she wanted the right to speak publicly about her experience without fear of retaliation. The executives agreed to all her terms, clearly eager to resolve the situation. As Keisha left the meeting, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at having her job back, satisfaction at forcing corporate accountability, but also disappointment that basic human decency had required such a battle. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Justice prevailed. Your grandmother should be proud, KP." She smiled, knowing exactly who had sent it. The story of Keisha's reinstatement made national news that evening. Cable television programs featured segments on corporate overreach and the importance of respecting public service. Editorial writers praised Director Patel's intervention while criticizing McDonald's initial response. The narrative had shifted from a simple policy violation to a broader discussion about values in American society. But the real impact was felt in ways that didn't make headlines. Franchise owners across the country quietly reviewed their policies regarding employee recognition of military personnel and public servants. Corporate training materials were updated to include guidance on appropriate flexibility in unique circumstances. The Keisha Williams incident became a case study in how rigid policies could create public relations disasters. Director Patel returned to his regular duties, but he made a point of staying in touch with Keisha's progress. His staff was initially surprised by his continued interest in what they considered a resolved personnel matter, but they gradually understood that for Patel, this case represented something larger: the responsibility of leadership to protect those who demonstrate the character traits essential for a functioning democracy. 3 weeks after her reinstatement, Keisha received another unexpected call. This time, it was from the FBI's Community Outreach Division, offering her an internship opportunity. "Director Patel mentioned that you're studying criminal justice," the caller explained. "We have a program for college students interested in federal law enforcement careers. Your situation demonstrates exactly the kind of character we value." The internship would be part-time, allowing her to continue her McDonald's job and college classes while gaining experience in federal law enforcement. It was the kind of opportunity that typically required extensive networking and political connections, advantages Keisha had never possessed. Now, her simple act of respect had opened doors she'd never imagined possible. Keisha's first day at the FBI field office was surreal. 6 months earlier, she'd been serving fast food and taking night classes, hoping someday to work in criminal justice. Now she was walking through federal security checkpoints, receiving training on community policing initiatives, and learning about the complex challenges facing modern law enforcement. Her supervisor, Agent Sarah Chen, explained her assignments with obvious enthusiasm. "We need people who understand community perspectives," Chen told her during orientation. "Your background gives you insights that many of our agents lack." The director specifically mentioned that your actions demonstrated moral courage, the willingness to do what's right, even when it might cost you personally. That's exactly what we need more of in federal service. The work was challenging but rewarding. Keisha helped develop community engagement programs, assisted with public education initiatives, and observed federal investigations that were reshaping her understanding of law enforcement complexity. She discovered that the same principles that had led her to honor Director Patel, respect for service, commitment to justice, courage in the face of adversity, were the foundation of effective federal law enforcement. Meanwhile, the McDonald's location where Keisha worked became an unexpected symbol of corporate redemption. The management team that had fired her was replaced, and the new staff received extensive training on community engagement and recognizing public service. Director Patel occasionally stopped by for coffee, always greeted warmly by employees who understood the significance of treating public servants with respect. Keisha's story began appearing in corporate training materials and business school case studies. Management consultants used her experience to illustrate the importance of values-based leadership and the dangers of rigid policy application. The incident that had nearly destroyed her career became a teaching tool for developing more thoughtful organizational cultures across numerous industries. Her grandmother's health improved significantly during this period, partly due to reduced financial stress, but mainly because of her pride in Keisha's achievements. "I always knew you were special," she told Keisha one evening as they watched the news coverage of her FBI internship. "But I never imagined that showing proper respect would change your whole life." 6 months into her internship, Keisha was invited to attend a congressional hearing where Director Patel was testifying about FBI community engagement initiatives. Sitting in the gallery, watching him expertly handle hostile questioning while maintaining his commitment to truth and transparency, she finally understood the full significance of that moment at the McDonald's counter. During a break in the proceedings, Patel approached her in the hallway. "How are you finding the work, Miss Williams?" he asked with genuine interest. "Challenging but inspiring," she replied. "I'm learning that real law enforcement is about protecting people's rights, not just enforcing rules," Patel smiled. "That's exactly the lesson I hoped you'd learn. Rules serve justice, not the other way around." As the hearing resumed, Keisha watched Patel field questions about controversial investigations and policy decisions. His responses were measured, factual, and unwavering in their commitment to constitutional principles. Several congressmen tried to trap him with leading questions, but his integrity proved unshakable. She realized she was witnessing the same character that had led him to advocate for her: moral courage under pressure. That evening, at a small reception for FBI community partners, Keisha found herself in conversation with federal prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, and community leaders, who all spoke of Director Patel with obvious respect. "He's the real deal," one veteran prosecutor told her. "In 30 years of federal service, I've never seen anyone more committed to doing what's right, regardless of political pressure." The conversation was interrupted by an aide who whispered something urgent in Patel's ear. His expression grew serious as he excused himself to take a call in a private office. Through the partially open door, Keisha could hear fragments of a conversation about a major investigation that was apparently reaching a critical phase. She was witnessing the weight of responsibility that came with his position. When Patel returned to the reception, he looked tired but determined. Agent Chen noticed Keisha's concern and explained quietly, "The director's been working on a case involving corruption in federal contracting. It's taken 2 years to build, and they're finally ready to move. This is what real leadership looks like, staying focused on justice even when powerful people want you to back down." The next morning brought stunning news. Director Patel announced the arrest of 12 individuals in a massive federal contracting fraud scheme, including 2 sitting congressmen and several high-ranking bureaucrats. The investigation had uncovered a network of corruption that had cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars while compromising national security projects. The press conference was carried live on every major network. Watching from the FBI field office, Keisha felt a profound sense of pride in being associated, however remotely, with this kind of principled leadership. The same man who had fought for her job was now exposing corruption at the highest levels of government. The same moral courage that had driven him to confront McDonald's executives was now protecting the integrity of federal institutions. The arrests sent shockwaves through Washington's political establishment. Some of the accused were powerful figures with extensive connections in both parties. Editorial writers praised Patel's courage while warning about the political backlash he was likely to face. Several congressmen publicly questioned the timing and scope of the investigation, clearly uncomfortable with its implications for their own relationships with the accused. Over the following weeks, as the investigation's scope became clear, Keisha gained new appreciation for the pressures facing federal law enforcement leadership. She watched Patel handle congressional hearings, media criticism, and political attacks with the same calm determination he'd shown in the McDonald's corporate boardroom. His commitment to truth remained unshakable, regardless of the consequences. The corruption case also provided Keisha with valuable learning opportunities. She was assigned to help coordinate community briefings about the investigation's impact on federal services. The work taught her how major corruption investigations affected ordinary citizens and reinforced her understanding that law enforcement's ultimate purpose was protecting public trust in democratic institutions. During one particularly challenging congressional hearing, where hostile lawmakers accused Patel of political motivations, Keisha watched him respond with facts, documentation, and unwavering professionalism. "The evidence speaks for itself," he told one particularly aggressive questioner. "Our responsibility is to follow that evidence wherever it leads, regardless of who might be inconvenienced by the truth." That evening, local news coverage highlighted the political pressure mounting against Patel. Several pundits suggested he might not survive the backlash from powerful interests affected by his investigation. Keisha felt a surge of anger at the suggestion that principled leadership should be punished for doing what was right. She was beginning to understand why her simple act of respect had resonated so deeply with him. The breakthrough came 3 months later when one of the arrested congressmen agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony exposed an even larger network of corruption involving defense contractors, regulatory officials, and foreign influence operations. The case that had begun with federal contracting fraud was now revealing threats to national security that reached into the highest levels of government. Patel's press conference announcing the expanded investigation was carried live across all networks. Standing at the podium with charts and documents behind him, he methodically explained how a relatively simple fraud scheme had evolved into a massive compromise of federal institutions. His presentation was masterful, clear, factual, and devastating in its implications for those involved. As Keisha watched the press conference, she realized she was witnessing a defining moment in American law enforcement history. The same principles that had led Director Patel to fight for her job were now being applied to protect the integrity of democratic institutions. The connection between personal character and institutional leadership had never been more clear or more inspiring. The political establishment's response was swift and vicious. Editorial boards called for Patel's resignation. Prominent politicians questioned his methods and motivations. Lobbyists and special interest groups launched coordinated attacks on his reputation. But through it all, Patel remained focused on the evidence, the law, and his responsibility to the American people. Keisha's role in the FBI's community outreach program gave her a front-row seat to observe how real leadership functions under extreme pressure. She watched Patel make difficult decisions about prosecutorial priorities, manage competing demands from various federal agencies, and maintain morale among FBI personnel who were facing unprecedented political attacks for doing their jobs. The investigation's final phase required coordination with international law enforcement agencies as evidence emerged of foreign government involvement in the corruption network. Patel worked 18-hour days, managing complex negotiations with allied intelligence services while preparing for what would likely be the most significant corruption prosecutions in decades. His dedication was absolute and inspiring. 6 months after the initial arrests, the full scope of Patel's investigation became public. 28 individuals were indicted, including 4 sitting congressmen, 6 federal bureaucrats, and multiple defense contractors. The conspiracy had compromised national security projects worth billions of dollars and had been operating for nearly a decade. The meticulous investigation had exposed systemic corruption that threatened the foundations of democratic governance. As news of the final indictments broke, Keisha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A simple act of respect at a McDonald's counter had connected her to the most significant corruption investigation in recent memory. The same moral courage that had led her to honor public service had driven Director Patel to expose those who betrayed that service. The courtroom was packed for the first major trial resulting from Patel's investigation. Former Congressman Bradley Morrison, once considered a rising star in Washington politics, sat at the defendant's table as prosecutors presented evidence of his involvement in the corruption scheme. Keisha attended as part of her FBI internship, watching justice unfold in real time. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from cooperating witnesses painted a detailed picture of how Morrison and his co-conspirators had systematically exploited their positions for personal gain. Defense attorneys tried to portray their clients as victims of overzealous prosecution, but the documentation was irrefutable. Justice was methodical, thorough, and inexorable. Director Patel's testimony was the trial's pivotal moment. For 6 hours, he explained how the investigation had uncovered layers of corruption that threatened national security and democratic institutions. His presentation was masterful. Every fact documented, every connection proven, every conclusion supported by evidence. The defense team's cross-examination failed to shake his testimony or undermine his credibility. When the guilty verdicts were announced, the courtroom erupted in applause from federal employees, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case. Morrison received a 12-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. Similar sentences followed for his co-conspirators. The message was clear. Corruption at the highest levels would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The trial's outcomes vindicated Patel's approach and validated the principles that had guided his investigation. Editorial writers who had previously criticized him now praised his courage and integrity. Political leaders who had questioned his methods were forced to acknowledge the necessity of his actions. The man who had fought for a McDonald's employee's job had also fought for the integrity of American democracy. As the corruption trials concluded, Keisha was completing her first year in the FBI internship program. Her supervisors recommended her for admission to the FBI Academy, with Director Patel's personal endorsement. The opportunity to become a federal agent, once an impossible dream, was now within reach, all because she had shown respect to a public servant. The McDonald's location where Keisha had worked became an unexpected pilgrimage site for people inspired by her story. Visitors would order coffee and ask employees about the young woman who honored the FBI director. The franchise owner eventually installed a small plaque recognizing Keisha's character and the importance of respecting public service, transforming a corporate embarrassment into a symbol of American values. Director Patel's investigation had far-reaching consequences beyond the courtroom victories. Congress passed new legislation strengthening oversight of federal contracting, and multiple agencies implemented reforms to prevent future corruption. The principled leadership he had demonstrated throughout the investigation became a model for other federal officials facing similar challenges to institutional integrity. Keisha's grandmother lived to see her granddaughter graduate from the FBI Academy, passing away peacefully just 2 months later. Her final words to Keisha were about the importance of character and the power of showing respect to those who serve others. "You changed your life by honoring someone else's service," she whispered. "That's the kind of person I raised you to be." At the Academy graduation ceremony, Director Patel delivered the keynote address to Keisha's class. He spoke about the connection between personal character and institutional integrity, using Keisha's story as an example of how individual actions could ripple through society in ways we never expect. "Agent Williams reminded me that respect for service must be mutual," he told the graduates. "We serve the people, and they honor that service." Keisha's first assignment was to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, where she worked on cases similar to the one that had made Patel famous. Her background gave her unique insights into how corruption affected working families and small communities. Her colleagues respected her judgment and valued her perspective on the human costs of institutional betrayal. Years later, when Keisha had become a senior agent investigating her own major corruption case, she would often think about that moment at the McDonald's counter. The decision to honor Director Patel had cost her a job, but gained her a career, a purpose, and a profound understanding of how individual character shapes institutional integrity. Director Patel eventually retired from federal service, but his legacy lived on in the agents he had inspired and the reforms his investigations had produced. His memoir, titled Character Under Fire, became required reading at the FBI Academy. The chapter about Keisha's story was titled The Power of Respect, and it emphasized how small acts of decency could reveal larger truths about character. The corruption investigation that had consumed 2 years of Patel's career resulted in the recovery of over $400 million in stolen taxpayer funds and the implementation of security reforms that protected critical national infrastructure projects. Multiple foreign intelligence operations were disrupted, and public trust in federal institutions was strengthened through demonstrated accountability. Keisha's career flourished as she applied the lessons learned from watching Patel's leadership under pressure. She became known for her thorough investigations, her respect for due process, and her ability to maintain integrity while navigating complex political pressures. Her colleagues often sought her advice on ethical dilemmas, knowing that her perspective was grounded in hard-won experience with the costs of doing what's right. The McDonald's policy changes that resulted from Keisha's case were eventually adopted by other major corporations facing similar situations. Business schools began teaching the Williams case as an example of how inflexible policies could create unnecessary conflicts with public values. Corporate training programs emphasized the importance of balancing procedural compliance with common sense and human decency. Congressional leaders who had initially criticized Patel's investigation were forced to acknowledge its necessity as the full scope of the corruption became clear. Several admitted privately that they had been pressured by special interests to oppose the investigation, demonstrating how the same corrupt networks had tried to protect themselves through political influence. Patel's refusal to yield to such pressure had saved democratic institutions from further compromise. The federal contractors implicated in the corruption scheme faced not only criminal penalties, but also civil liability that bankrupted several companies and led to industry-wide reforms. New oversight mechanisms prevented the conflicts of interest that had enabled the corruption, and competitive bidding processes were strengthened to ensure taxpayer funds were used efficiently and honestly. Public opinion polling showed that Patel's handling of the corruption investigation had significantly increased public trust in federal law enforcement. Citizens appreciated seeing powerful individuals held accountable, regardless of their political connections or economic influence. The investigation demonstrated that the rule of law applied equally to everyone, reinforcing fundamental democratic principles. Keisha's story continued to inspire young people considering careers in public service. Speaking at high schools and colleges, she emphasized that character mattered more than connections, that doing the right thing was often difficult but always worthwhile, and that individual actions could have profound consequences for society. Her message resonated particularly strongly with students from working-class backgrounds. The international cooperation that Patel's investigation had required led to stronger relationships between American law enforcement and allied agencies around the world. The success in exposing foreign influence operations encouraged other countries to pursue similar investigations, creating a network of accountability that made international corruption more difficult and more dangerous for those who attempted it. Director Patel's principled approach to leadership became a case study in government management courses and executive training programs. His ability to maintain focus on mission objectives while resisting political pressure demonstrated how institutional integrity could be preserved even in highly polarized environments. Future federal leaders studied his methods and applied his principles to their own challenges. The lasting impact of both Keisha's initial act of respect and Patel's subsequent investigation created a legacy that extended far beyond their individual careers. Federal agencies implemented new ethics training programs, corporate America reconsidered rigid policy enforcement, and ordinary citizens felt renewed confidence that their institutions could be held accountable when principled leaders were willing to act courageously. Today, Agent Keisha Williams leads the FBI's Community Trust Initiative, working to strengthen relationships between federal law enforcement and the communities they serve. Her office wall displays two items: her FBI Academy diploma and a faded McDonald's name tag from her first job. Both represent the same truth: that character and service are inseparable, and that respect must flow in all directions for institutions to maintain their legitimacy. Director Patel's retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds of federal employees whose careers had been shaped by his example. In his farewell address, he returned to the theme that had defined his leadership: we serve the people, and we must be worthy of their trust. That trust begins with small moments, like a young woman choosing to honor service over policy, and extends to the largest challenges facing our democracy. The corruption investigation that began with federal contracting fraud ultimately prevented a national security crisis that could have compromised critical infrastructure for decades. The foreign intelligence networks that had penetrated federal agencies were neutralized, and the domestic conspirators who had enabled them faced justice. Patel's refusal to accept that procedures mattered more than principles had literally saved the country from ongoing security threats. Keisha often reflects on the profound truth her grandmother had taught her: that character is revealed in how we treat others when no one important is watching. Her decision to honor Director Patel had indeed been witnessed by security cameras, but her motivation had been pure, simple respect for someone dedicated to serving others. That authenticity had resonated with a leader who valued integrity above all else. The ripple effects continue to this day. McDonald's franchise owners report increased respect from community members who remember how the company eventually did the right thing. Federal employees cite Patel's example when facing pressure to compromise their principles. Young people entering public service reference Keisha's story as proof that individual character can change institutional cultures and that doing what's right is always worth the risk. The lessons embedded in this remarkable chain of events speak to fundamental questions about leadership, integrity, and the relationship between individual character and institutional health. When a young woman chose respect over convenience, and when a federal director chose justice over political safety, they demonstrated that principled action creates positive change even in the most challenging circumstances. Their story reminds us that character matters in ways both small and large, that respect for service must be mutual and genuine, and that institutions are only as strong as the individuals who compose them. If this account of courage, integrity, and justice has moved you, share it with others who need reminding that doing what's right, even when it costs us personally, is always the choice that honors our best values and protects our democratic heritage. Like and subscribe for more stories of principled leadership in action.